All right, thanks to you who are just joined us. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes, so hang on tight. Thanks for coming. All right. Okay, everybody. Since it's 7 o'clock, I'd like to start on time. So first, welcome. My name is Matt Bender. I'm your adult program coordinator here at the Schaumburg Township District Library. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program about forest bathing and forest therapy with certified forest therapist Linda Carlin. Before we get started, just a few things. Number one, if you have any questions for Linda, feel free to put them in either the chat box or the Q&A box. She will take questions as they come. She is also going to be asking you some questions during the presentation for participation. So if you'd like to participate, click on that chat box now so that you'll be able to type or tap your response when you are able. Secondly, if you enjoy this talk and you want to put these thoughts into actions, Saturday, we are doing a forest therapy walk led by two of Linda's compatriots, cohorts.
Yeah. Well, we were
Great
in the
word.
same cohort. Yeah.
Yeah. Retta and Kathleen, they are going to walk us through the Carl Hansen Woods. They're off of Gulf Road and Route 59. If you're going west on Gulf Road, you take a right on Route 59. The entrance to Carl Hansen Woods is on the left side. If you register by Friday morning, I can send you a map of where to go. We're meeting in picnic area 2, and we hope to see you there. We still have some open slots. So without any more from me, I'd like to introduce Linda, our presenter tonight. Linda, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're here and spending actually what's a pretty, a pretty beautiful evening in front of the screen. So happy to have you here and find out some more, about forest bathing. So I am going to share my screen here, and we'll make our way through this presentation. And as Matt said, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll try to deal with them as I go along. And also, there'll be some time at the end for any questions that you still have or I haven't answered yet. So again, and thank you to the Schaumburg Library for inviting me and for also putting out that walk on Saturday morning. And I hope that, especially after tonight's presentation, that many of you will decide you want to try forest bathing if you haven't already. Okay, so Again, my name is Linda Carlin. I am a certified ANFT forest therapy guide. ANFT stands for the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. It's kind of a long title there. I'll explain in a little bit what that organization is and how it's associated with forest therapy, or as it's sometimes called, these terms are interchangeable: forest therapy and forest bathing, especially here in the United States. Okay, so let me keep going here. I'd like to, before actually I start talking some more, um, do a land acknowledgement. And in Schaumburg, Illinois, we inhabit areas that are the ancestral lands of indigenous peoples, including, and I'm giving the English names here: Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and the Sioux. And we have a responsibility to acknowledge these Native nations and the harm that has been done to them through displacement. Let us work together with them to heal our wounds and the wounds inflicted on this land. Let us move forward in harmony and in honor of past, present, and future generations. Okay. So, actually, to start the program, I want to reach out to you and ask you what brings you to tonight's program. Um, why are you interested? Perhaps maybe some of you have already experienced a forest therapy walk. And if you haven't, what is, what kind of brings you to this program where you want to find out some more about it? And so that's my first question. Have you experienced a walk, or what just brings you here tonight? What do you want to learn about? And then another important question I have for you is, where do you go to feel connected with nature? So what are some of your favorite places, or what's a place that you have maybe a special connection with? And I should, I'm already getting some answers, so that's great. So I'm going to back up a little bit. And one of you said forest therapy is something I've never heard of before, but it sounds really cool. I love nature and I'm looking for ways to care for myself since going back to teaching. Yeah, that's great. And as a teacher myself, I can totally relate to that. I don't know if you're teaching online or in the classroom, but yeah, nature is a great, for me, a great outlet, and a great place to go when I need some um, get away from work. Um, and somebody else said, I feel very connected with forests and I'd love to learn about this process. Great, good. So I hope I can help you do that tonight. And again, feel free to just keep putting things in the chat box. Where do you go to feel connected with nature? And maybe the third question here I have is a little harder, but what is your current relationship with nature? Although I'm already seeing that in some of the chat here. Somebody said, I have not heard of forest therapy, but have always sought forest environments where I need to recharge my batteries. Okay, good. And another participant said, love walks in the neighborhood, enjoy the flowers and trees. So that's great, because if we find places, or we have places in our neighborhoods where we can go easily, just walk out the door and have that connection close to us. So that's kind of increases our chances of doing it more often, maybe even daily. Another person said, I love hanging from a couple trees in my hammock and just enjoying the sights and sounds. So I'm assuming again that that hammock is close, maybe in the backyard, maybe in the front yard, but not too far, so that you can do that again fairly easily by just walking outside. And I like that you're saying too, enjoying the sights and the sounds. That's one thing that we'll talk a little bit about later when I explain what happens on a forest therapy walk, or what you might expect if you go on one. But we rely so much on our visual sense of seeing, but sounds are so important too. If if we were doing this a little bit more, less virtually, I'd say, or you could even at some point just, open up that window or walk outside briefly. What do you hear tonight as the sun is going down here? Not just what you see, but what's it smell like outside right now? Or what sounds do you hear? So, yeah, another participant said, I'm also here out of curiosity. And oh, great, somebody did it and said, I hear insects. Yeah, we're getting to that time of year where, I can still hear, for example, crickets outside, and I just love that sound of crickets. So um, it's not going to be there maybe in another month or so. So I'm really appreciating those sounds, and maybe some other insects that are sounding out yet before it gets too cold. So great. Thanks all for your responses here so far, and I will ask you again later in the program for some other things. And as I'm going along here, as I'm talking, if you think of another thing that you want to share or have an answer to one of our questions here, then again, please feel free to put it in the chat box. Okay. So one of the things question you probably all have, again, especially if you haven't been on a force therapy walk, is what is force therapy? And let me just mention the picture here, and then I'll go on to answer that question. But here's a picture. I'm actually in part of this picture with some of my should I say again, as Matt was kind of stumbling over this word, people who are in my cohort are people who are also force therapy guides, people who are involved in ANFT in the program. And this was taken in the backyard of one of our guides. But and just to point to, all of the pictures that you see tonight are pictures that I've taken, or in this case, someone else took it because I'm in the picture. But pictures usually that I've taken on my walks, some forest therapy walks, or sometimes I prep for walks in the Chicago area. So if you ever have any question about where that picture was from, let me know too. But these are in the presentation tonight, pictures that I've taken. So what is forest therapy? There's different ways to answer that, but I should just say that I put under here this little definition that I like, and that comes from the organization that I am certified with. And the name here is up on the screen, the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. And the website is up there too. If you'd like to take a look at the website, you'll get some more in-depth information about this organization and what we do and what we try to share with all of our participants. But I like this definition that is on the website, and it says forest therapy is a relational practice that brings people into deeper intimacy with natural places. And I'm going to read that one more time. So forest therapy is a relational practice that brings people into deeper intimacy with natural places. And I think over the course of this whole presentation tonight, I'll keep answering that question, perhaps what forest therapy is. But it is basically a practice where we as guides try to connect people to nature and do it in a way that we encourage not just a one-time, experience, but a way of maybe changing your life a little bit. I know some of you have already said that you're very interested, or you're very connected to nature in the sense that you enjoy being out in nature. And so that's great. I know when I started when I first found out about forest therapy and went on a walk and started thinking about maybe becoming a guide, I was also, I would say, a nature person. But my training has really brought that, should I say, that connection to nature on a different level. And that's been really transformational for me. But when we take people on walks, or we're just trying to open up nature, open that door so people can walk through and maybe sometimes remember what it is like to be in connection with nature. For some people, even people who spend time in nature, you know, each time you go in, or each time you go out, I should say, and experience nature, whether it's in that hammock or whether you're walking down the sidewalk in your neighborhood, or maybe you're going to a local forest preserve, or you're going to a national park. There's all different levels, but I think in each of those cases, we have the ability to come close to nature and build that relationship with our planet and with nature. So we want to have people in that deeper intimacy, a deeper connection with it, wherever you're starting at, deepen it. And a little bit about the association here. It was founded in 2012, and since then it has grown quite a bit. One of the co-founders, Amos Clifford, is still associated with. The other co-founder is now doing more work in Canada and training people with the organization in Canada. But for ANFT, we currently have over 2,000 trained guides in 60 countries. So it actually is a worldwide organization. I'm talking a little bit about it here as part of the United States because that's where I'm trained and that's where I do my force therapy guide work. But just know that you can go to many places around the world and experience force therapy walks through guides who have been trained in our association. And personally, I became a certified ANFT force therapy guide in 2017. I went on my first forest walk in 2016, and I have to tell you, about 10 minutes into the walk, I was like, wow, this is something, and it was really new to me. I had read some things about forest bathing and its connection to Japan, but I saw a walk come up on a program guide, and I went to one, and I was really taken with it, and talked with that particular guide afterwards and said, what brought you to becoming a guide and how can I do it? And so that began sort of my journey to becoming a certified guide. And since 2017, I don't know how many walks I've guided, but I've guided walks mostly here in the Chicago area in forest preserves and at state parks, at Moraine Hill State Park. I'm trying to think what some of you might be familiar with. I started off at Volo Bog, approached Stacy Iwaniki there, and she was very gracious. She hadn't heard of forest therapy either, but I did my first walks there and am so appreciative of that place and of her and the ability to do that. I've done walks at Cook County Forest Preserves, and I'm doing a walk next month up in Lake County. So I have to say, and between Cook and DuPage and Lake County, and McHenry County, we've got some really wonderful places to go out and connect with nature in the area. So let me get back to that question about what is forest therapy. You might have an idea already, but as we're talking about it with ANFT, I have to say, and for most people, when we think about force therapy, we go back to this phrase, Shinrinyoku, which is a Japanese phrase that literally translates into forest bath. So to take a forest bath. And just a little history on this. This term comes from the Japanese, but the Japanese culture has had a long history of nature immersion and nature immersion practices going back really hundreds of thousands of years to the practice of Shintoism and Zen Buddhism, which both, again, have connections or practices where they encourage connection with the natural world. So this idea of Shinrinyoku basically came from the Japanese, and ANFT as a forced therapy guide, we use that idea as kind of one of the bases of the practice that we have. And just to continue with the history there in Japan, in even though we have this long history, it was really early in the 1980s where there was kind of crisis going on in Japan. And at that point, there were the society there, and we can relate to this here in the United States certainly as well, had we just had become a overworked, stressed out, and a physically ill population. And the Japanese government was just trying to think of what can we do to help our people? What can we do to, you know, turn this around or deal with people who are we've really come to a place where it's no longer healthy and we need to do something important, or we need to do something very different to help. So they started to look at how nature again could more deliberately perhaps be used to help people de-stress, help people get away from the work, and physically heal. And one thing I'd like to say, I don't know, many of you have already shared the fact that you enjoy being in nature. And maybe you have felt like I do, that after I take a walk, especially if I'm kind of stressed out with work, or something's really worrying me, I go out oftentimes and take a walk. And just being in nature kind of calms me down. And so that's something that we might have experienced already or feel um, has happened to us, or regularly happens to us when we're able to get into a connection with nature. But the Japanese government decided to again do this more deliberately, and they created a program um, to really get people out into their forests. So if you go to Japan now, you'll see that there are designated trails where you can go forest bathing. In other words, immerse yourself in that forest environment. And the research since that time, since the early 80s, when the Japanese really kind of kickstarted this, um, their program, it's expanded. So many more countries, not just Japan, but through other countries in Asia and Korea, for example, and certainly in the US, this is kind of caught on in a way, and people have become, again, maybe reinterested in, or maybe taking that idea that there is something in nature and researching it further. And so there have been, um, I should say in Japan, but in other places as well, actually studies that have done where, for example, um, somebody will take your blood pressure before you go out for the walk, or will be able to somehow measure your heartbeat and so forth, and you go on a walk and come back. And some of these tests have gotten more elaborate, but more and more, I should say, I don't want to say experiments, but more research has been done, and with finding some really good results about how being in nature helps us physically, physiologically, as well as mentally. So one more thing before I push the slide here is that when putting this all together, when we have a walk, a forest therapy walk, um, we emphasize a sensory experience. So just as I was saying earlier, like, when you go out, look, but also rely on your other senses. And those senses, of course, we think of our five senses, the smell, and what do we hear? What do we physically, what can we touch out there? What do we see? But also we can talk about some other senses maybe that are sometimes a little dormant, or we don't think about: our sense of direction, or our sense of where we're placed within an environment. So we do, when we go on our ANFT walks, we do emphasize a sensory experience and get you out of that thinking brain into the here and now. And what are you noticing now? And that's part of the immersion, but also to immerse yourself in nature. So to get away from maybe our technology, turn off our phones, and really focus on the natural world that's around us. And also this idea of reciprocity, and I'll talk about that a little more, but that is an important element of ANFT walks and the practice of forest therapy is giving back to our natural world and receiving those gifts, but also giving back. Okay, and just a reminder, if you have any questions as I'm going along, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them, or write them down and save them and ask a little bit later. So what are the benefits of forest therapy? Or again, forest bathing? And again, those terms are pretty interchangeable. For us, the emphasis on the present moment gives us a break from that stress that we might be feeling each day, or that worry that we have, or that thing that's just, heavy on our minds or on our hearts. So when we go into nature and we go on a forest therapy walk, again, the emphasis is on what are you noticing right now? What does it smell like on this particular morning in this particular location? So we try to, again, get you out of that thinking mind, out of that worry mind, and emphasize the present moment. Again, with some of that research and that's going on and those tests that are being done, we can see that when being in nature can lower the cortisol levels in our bodies. And cortisol is what goes up when we're under stress. If we're under, that flight mode or fight and flight mode, or we're just feeling tense, we have this increase in our body in cortisol levels. And so if we're able to get into nature and relax, those cortisol levels can go down, and we can see this in some of the tests, and that's a real benefit to our bodies to reduce those stressful levels. And then we can also increase something good, which is what we can call NK, or natural killer cells. There has been some research done, especially in forests that are conifer forest, or trees that are cone bearing, that these trees produce essential oils that protects them from things like fungus and so forth, or disease. But when these essential oils are emitted into the air and we humans breathe them in, they have again, beneficial effect on our bodies. So there's some research being done on how breathing in this, what I want to say, these essential oils, or these aromas that the trees emit. It's almost like a natural aromatherapy, that they boost our immune system and are a support for these good cells that can kill, kind of the invaders in our system. And one point here in the chat, and I'm just going to take a look. Can you please elaborate on the concept of reciprocity when you get a chance? Yes, I will do that, and probably in the next slide. So thanks for that. Another benefit of forest therapy is improved cognitive abilities. And maybe you've experienced this too, but when you're out in nature for a bit, if you can leave behind that stressful state of mind and just breathe, and maybe just, immerse yourself in that environment, we find that after maybe 20 minutes even or so, you're able to come back to whatever you're doing and focus better. So we can see again improved cognitive abilities, the ability to focus, the ability to think a little more clearly, and to maybe get back to whatever we're doing in a little better mood and a little bit better state of mind. Research has shown that there can also be improved respiratory and cardiovascular functions or improvement in those areas, so that again, breathing in that air or just relaxing, um, walking outside in nature benefits our bodies physiologically. Okay. And another point here, a benefit of force therapy, is help for attention fatigue recovery. And I've put that phrase in quotation marks, like, what is attention fatigue recovery? And you can imagine attention fatigue. Excuse me, if you're a person like me who right now has to spend a certain amount of time on the computer, it can be wearing, right? There is a certain fatigue that I get just looking at the screen or just working on the screen. Um, and I think this is true a lot for our devices. So whether it's our phones or our computers, the TV, when we spend a lot of time on those devices, we do get a kind of fatigue. But maybe similarly, when we are always in our modes of go here, do this, um, pay attention to this, it kind of puts us on high alert, and our brains can get tired. Our brains need rest. Our brains need time to just, what we say, kind of veg out, right? Like the person who said, I go on my hammock and just, leave everything behind. If we don't get those opportunities, we get this kind of attention fatigue. Um, and we need opportunities to recover from that. We need those chances to just kind of turn our brains off, our busy brains off, and give our whole bodies rest of always being, alert to what's coming next. And in the world that we're living now, in this pandemic world, and lots of things going on in the news, that also contributes to this kind of high tension in our bodies, um, holding in that stress, and our minds just always feeling like we have to, go to the next thing or what's happening now. So force therapy is a great place to get some recovery time for attention fatigue. And then my last point here about the benefits of force therapy, I've put down feelings of acceptance and belonging. And I think I've seen on my walks, this is so important. When we go into nature, we're not judged, right? We're not, nature doesn't look at what we're wearing. Nature doesn't care who we are or what we did 2 hours ago or 2 days ago. Um, we can really kind of let go all of those things that might again cause us to feel like a little cautious, or feel like we're not accepted, we don't belong in nature. Because we are nature, we are part of nature, we are part of this world. um, we can really benefit from those feelings of acceptance and belonging. Okay. So here I've put kind of the same title here, the benefits of forest therapy and forest bathing, but I've turned this around, and this is where I'm going to answer that question about reciprocity, because I want to ask the question, not just how does forest bathing benefit us, but how does the practice of forest bathing benefit the more than human world? And I use this phrase, more than human world. It's not my phrase. It comes from, our practice and from um, the practice of forest therapy. But more than human world has a sense of, it's not just us humans in the world. There is more than human, right? There's a lot to the world besides humans. And so I'm using this phrase, the more than human world. But how does the practice of forest bathing benefit the more than human world? Um, and again, this first point, forest bathing emphasizes reciprocity and basically comes to this question: how can we show gratitude for the gifts of nature, and how can we give back? So when we are in nature or we go on a forest therapy walk, I think we can really feel the gifts that nature can give us. But how do we return that? Um, how do we give gifts back to nature? And so we're thinking, and hopefully get into the mind frame of this idea of reciprocity. So it is not just one directional, right? It is coming to us, but also we are giving back. And second point here, forest bathing involves caretaking. So with repeated practice, awareness grows. And I kind of phrase these in the form of questions, but what can we do to take care of our earth and support all beings? So if we can experience nature, if we can go out on forest therapy walks, if we can become more aware of the natural world that we are a part of, um, many times we care about it more, right? We become aware of things. We're more alert to changes that are happening, and when we care about something, we're more likely to, again, do things that will benefit it, or we will act in a gracious or giving manner so that we can, again, think of not just what we are receiving, but what we can do to take care of our earth. And I think we know that humans don't have a very good track record of taking care of the earth. And so through this practice of forest bathing, we are hoping that we're reminded that many parts of the earth are breaking down. And what can we do to turn that around? Or what can we do? This can be an overwhelming question, but what can we do ourselves to maybe take care of the spots of nature that we appreciate or we find ourselves in? And that could be something simple like, picking up litter, or, making sure that we don't take the plants in that area. Um, so there are small ways and maybe some bigger ways too that we can really think about how can we support all of nature, and which we are a part of course. And then I like this phrase too in the third point here, and this I've taken this phrase in quotation marks from the book Healing Trees by Ben Page. Ben Page is someone who has certainly does forest therapy walks. He practices in Los Angeles, and but he is also one of the trainers who when I went through my forest therapy training. Um, he was one of the people training me, and he's recently written this book on healing trees, and I really like this phrase from it. And he says, "Forest bathing recognizes the autonomy, intelligence, and dignity of nature." And I don't know how that what that phrase means to you, but I've thought about that a bit, and I really like it because it's a way of thinking that we might sometimes we aren't certainly aren't taught, I think. Um, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but I know I wasn't taught that. Um, and it's a way of viewing our world and viewing nature and us in it, but especially, that more than human world as having an intelligence, as worth of, worthy of dignity and respect, and having an autonomy that we as humans sometimes aren't really thinking about, or we're not aware of that. But I think it's a very important point that I know for myself, it's really important to remind myself of that. And each time I'm in nature, to have that respect and that have that recognition that, you know, the water and the earth, trees, whatever it is, the animal has its own autonomy, its intelligence, and its dignity that needs to be recognized and respected. Okay, I hope I've answered that question about reciprocity, and if not, ask it again, and I'll try to answer it again. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about, hold on, I'm going to look in the chat because I see something up here. Yes, you did. Thank you. Okay, great. I'm going to talk more specifically about what happens on an ANFT sequence forest therapy walk. And if you are going on the walk this Saturday, or maybe you're still deciding, this is what you can expect pretty much on that walk. I should say expect. This is the sequence that you can expect. The actual experience, I don't know what'll happen because it'll be specific to that morning and that environment and the guides and the group. So, but this will give you a good idea of what the walks are and what happens on them. So walks are often 2 to 3 hours long and cover a mile or less. And some people are really surprised by that because you're like, wow, 2 to 3 hours long and you only go a mile or even less than a mile. And yeah, that is really one of the key points to it, because one of the things we want you to do in the walk is slow down and notice things. So the guide usually sets a pace, and sometimes it's difficult for participants to slow down that much, and that's why it's the beginning part of the walk is really geared toward that, to get away from that let's go, let's do it, to okay, here we are, what am I noticing? And so I'm not sure, Matt, if you're listening, I'm not sure how long the walk, I guess the walk on Saturday is 2 hours, so that fits into this, yeah. And just a picture here, this is a picture of me that was taken during my training week and on one of those walks where I definitely slowed down and looking at what's around. So most walks led by ANFT trained guides follow this sequence. And this was a sequence that was carefully thought about and designed in part by Amos Clifford, the co-founder of ANFT. And the idea is to, again, I think he would say, and maybe we would all say, like, if we really want to get connected to nature, one of the best ways to do this would be to take a week or two and go out in a wild area and just get away from our busy life and be fully immersed in that environment. But how many of us can really do that? Either afford to do it or have the time to do it? And the answer is probably very few of us. Or maybe we can do it sometimes maybe once a year if we go on vacation. But the answer is generally that's a tough thing for us to do, is to go out and immerse ourselves 1 to 2 weeks, maybe several times a year. That would be a tough thing. So he thought, well, we need this in our lives. We need this, but how can we design an experience that will fit into most people's lives, or be sort of feasible for people to do? So that's why, again, we have this 2 to 3 hour time frame. And the sequence of the walks is basically this. So there will be, introduction where the guide will just say hello to everybody, or maybe you'll go around and just say your name and why you're there today. The guide will maybe talk about things like in the summertime, perhaps the bugs are, the mosquitoes are bad. So if you want bug spray, here it is. Or you might be told beforehand to bring to bring bug spray, for example. On the walk on Saturday, you might be told, dress comfortably and bring some water. But specific to that trail or that particular morning, there might be some things that the guide will talk about. Be careful about poison ivy, or be careful, stay on the trail, or whatever. So just a way, again, of kind of easing into the experience. Most people come, from their lives, whatever's happening. Um, got to take the kids to this, or got to finish that little project in the house before I go, or put that last load of laundry in, or whatever. Coming from work, perhaps. So what the whole walk is designed to do is, again, get us out of that busy frame of mind and get us to slow down and get us into this place where we can connect with nature. So we start with some hellos and info. And then we do and I have it on the third point, a series of invitations. But what happens first usually is what we call this thing called pop, and it's basically, you might feel like it's a little bit like a meditation. It's not quite a meditation, but we ask you to, again, slow down and focus on your senses. So we'll kind of gear you into each sense and say, okay, what is the farthest thing that you hear right now, and really focus on that sense of hearing. Or what does it feel like to have your body, in this place at this time of day? What are you noticing around you? Or if you breathe in, what do you smell? What is it that if you turn this way, what's in the air that you smell this morning? So it's a way of kind of transitioning you into this place where you can connect with nature, and also kind of reminding you, hey, it's not just what I see, because oftentimes when we do this first part, we ask you to close your eyes. So let's turn off that sense of sight and focus on some of our other senses that sometimes maybe we're not so focused on. So, and that also, again, as I said, begins our slowdown. And then throughout the walk, the guide will give you invitations, and this language is very intentional. Invitations are just as we might imagine. We invite you to do something, or to experience something, or notice something, okay? And it's an invitation that truly is your choice to accept. If you decide you can't do that, or you're not ready to do that, or you don't want to do that, then of course you don't. But the invitations are based on the location. So whatever trail you're at, or whatever, let's say, time of day it is, um, what's going on nearby. So the guide will look at that based on the location. And most of the guides will go out. Sometimes we guide in places that we guide in a lot. So we're very, what should I say, knowledgeable about this area. I mean, that's usually true. We try to do that. Part of our training is to learn a lot about the ecology of the area that we'll be guiding in. So looking at, what is the more than human world here? Who lives here? What are the animals that live here? What are the rocks that are here in the water? Um, what is this place? What's the history of this place? Who has walked on this ground before us? So all of that, and we look at the plants in the area and study the plants. So all of that goes into our training, and it doesn't necessarily go into the walk. In the sense that we're not talking about, okay, here's a maple tree. That's not what it's about. But we try to be very familiar with the area and base these invitations on the location. The invitations are also based on, as I said, the day, the conditions of the environment, the participants. So who's in the group, and how big is the group, for example, the guy's experience and intuition. And during the walk, while there'll be probably for 2 hours, let's say there may be, I don't know, 4 invitations or so. And during the invitation, or during when the guide kind of gives you the invitation and sends you out, there is what I call this kind of shared silence. So again, part of the purpose of the walk is to get each person in connection with nature. And to do that, again, we need to turn off our devices, kind of be tuned in to what's around us. So there is that a lot of time in the walk where you're not talking to others, but you are listening, you are noticing, you are, again, trying to get or enhance your connection with nature. But the guide will usually call you back, sometimes with a coyote call, or some um, you know I don't know, playing of the flute. I know Ben does that sometimes, or some other sound to bring you all back. And then there may be a chance for sharing. So what did you notice? And then you have, again, the opportunity to share what you noticed or not. There's always that option for passing and being silent. So during those invitations, we hope you're noticing a lot, and then coming back, and if you wish to share what you noticed. And then especially on a walk that lasts 2 to 3 hours, many times we try to put in this what we call a sit spot. And this is a time when maybe 15-20 minutes that you literally just sit in maybe in silence, or sometimes you might be asked to look at a scroll, look at a reading, or you might be posed a question before you go to your sit spot. But many times it's just a time for you to not worry about the time, and again, just to immerse yourself in the environment, in the world around you, and just notice. Notice what's going on, and notice maybe how you're feeling. Notice this place and this time that you're in this nature. Um, just a quiet time to kind of soak it all in. And sometimes, what people say about sit spots is, like, wow, I don't take that time, or nobody ever says to me, hey, 15-20 minutes, just go ahead and don't worry about the time. I will call you back, and just relax, or just put yourself in that place. One of the invitations that I have done, and this is not necessarily part of sit spot, or although it can be, is to just lay in the grass and watch the clouds go by. And it seemed like a very simple thing, but I know, for example, when I've done that on my walks, um, people have said to me, wow, I haven't done that since I was a kid, or I forgot that I could actually do that. And or you actually gave me permission to do that, and I'm really grateful for that, because I haven't done it in so long, and how much I really enjoyed looking at those clouds, and looking at those formations, and just staring into the sky. So yeah, if you're interested, I can tell you more about the invitations, but that is a good part of the walk, and then oftentimes will be followed by a sit spot. And then oftentimes followed by, and this is in the traditional sequence, the end of the walk is a tea ceremony. Now, during the pandemic, a lot of our walks, we haven't done the tea ceremony, just because we are cutting out sharing anything that we touch, or maybe sometimes sitting that close together. But in a traditional walk, and it can be adapted too, we do a tea ceremony. And it depends, again, the location of the walk. Like, as I said previously, I've done a lot of walks that are in state parks, for example, and or in forest preserves, where I can't pick any plants there. I can't forage. And so I can't bring things that I found on the walk into the tea. But some guides can do that on the places where they walk. And so, as I mentioned too earlier, part of our training is to look at the plants in an area and learn which plants are edible, which plants are poisonous. And so a guide may, if they can during the walk, take some of those things and put them into the boiling water at the end and make a tea. Now, if I can't, and I can't do that usually on my walks, what I will do is when I am previewing the walk, when I'm planning, when I go to the place and I plan out my walk, I'll say, okay, there's a lot of red clover here. So that's something that grows in this area, maybe, maybe isn't indigenous to this area. So I'm going to put that in my tea. And so I go to my health food store and I buy red clover to put in the tea. Or for example, I might put dandelion root in because a lot of dandelions grow around here in the summertime. So that's something that is in that, maybe on that, in that area where the walk is taking place. So whether it's something that's foraged or the guide, you know, buys beforehand, or some guides grow things in their gardens, maybe some mints, for example, and put it in the tea. Usually the tea is made from plants that we find in that area. And then the first cup is always poured out into the earth. The first cup is for the earth, and then everybody will drink, and that's officially the end of the walk. And then there may be a time to share, ask questions, talk a little bit more about, what people are noticing that day, and then basically end of the walk. And then that re-entry into our routine, our kind of daily life, but hopefully with a greater awareness and maybe a little shift in how we feel. Okay, if you have any questions about this sequence, please put it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going here. And I've got somebody up here. What if you don't know how to identify a dandelion plant? Won't that cause embarrassment? I'm not sure it causes embarrassment for who. I mean, the guide will, there's no identifying plants on the walk. The guide will, again, part of the training for the guide is to be able to go out and recognize, let's say, what a dandelion is. And this isn't part of the walk at all. It is just, something that we as the guides are trained to do. But again, that's not something that we ask people to do. It's just something that if I were going to make a tea, I would need to know what plants I could put in there, that are healthy and that are not poisonous. So that is something that we study and we work on. None of that is asked of the participants. So I hope that's clear. If not, again, send me another question. Sometimes people ask, why a guide? Okay. Or, a lot of you probably already go out in nature and take walks. So why do we need a guide, or what use is the guide? And here's a few points that I came up with and that we think about. One of the things is that slowing down on our own can be difficult. So, again, most of us, when we get into our usual routines, we're going at a pretty good pace. We've got things to do. We've got people to see, as the saying goes, right? So when we actually, even when we go on walks in nature, sometimes we're just moving, right? And we move through that environment, and we might see a bird, or we might listen. And again, I don't want to characterize anybody's, experience, but I know that a lot of us in our daily lives, we do move fairly quickly, and we don't slow down enough to notice a lot of things out in nature. So one of our tasks as the guide is to help everybody slow down. And that can be difficult sometimes, depending on the day we're having, or where we're coming from. Another thing is that guides are trained to facilitate and support nature connections. So our goal really is to get you connected to nature, and the invitations, for example, are designed to do that. So you might be experiencing nature in a little different way, which maybe um, with practice you can do on your own, but certainly the guides will help you do that. And then just this idea of practice. A practice needs support and repetition. So if you can go, out in nature in yourself daily, weekly, that's great. But going on forest therapy walks with others really is a kind of support for doing that. And to do it not just once, but repeatedly, which is if we do it repeatedly, we get the most benefit out of it. Um, Guided walks can give us new perspectives that we might not see on our own. Again, either through the invitations that the guide gives us on the walk, or during that time when people share. I notice a lot of times people will say after the walk, they'll say, I looked at the same thing, but I didn't have that same reaction, or I didn't have that same impression, or I noticed something different. And when that person said that, I was like, wow, I didn't notice that. So just having different people say different things about what they notice gives us a new perspective sometimes. And then a guided walk allows participants to focus on the experience. I know that when I go on guided walks, I'm not the guide, but I am the participant. I feel really good about that because, I don't have to worry about the time. I don't have to worry about should I take a right turn up here or whatever. I don't have to worry about what do I do next? The guide will help me with that. So to me, that's a really nice part of going on a guided walk is that I don't have to worry about the experience in the sense that I can just focus on my connection to nature here. Okay. So one of the questions too I want to ask you, I made mention of it a little earlier, but how has the pandemic affected our relationship with the more than human world? And you can answer this in a personal way. So what have you noticed? Or during the pandemic, have you noticed your connection to nature has changed? Or have you noticed some things about your relationship with the more than human world that's a little different during the pandemic? Maybe you can share an example, or maybe just answer the question, has your relationship with nature changed during the pandemic? So I know that Matt and I, before the presentation started tonight, we were just talking about how since the pandemic began, there has been this increase in people going out into natural areas. And, you may have noticed that in your own life. I, I'm a person who goes out in nature a lot, but when, for example, I was sitting at my desk looking out the window, especially early on in the pandemic, I just noticed how many more people, for example, were walking and going to the park, taking that route to the park, families out together. I know that the attendance at some of the national parks went up a whole lot during the pandemic. Um, yeah, one of the participants said, I've definitely been out in it more because of the pandemic. Yeah, maybe because your job changed or you've been at home more, you were just able to take that time to go outside. Um, Maybe the pandemic affected your job where you had more opportunities to go out. And of course, we're, trying to isolate more. And again, in nature, we don't have to worry about this person being close to us. So that's another benefit of just being in nature. Somebody else in the chat here said, it is just during this pandemic that it is just during this pandemic that I have even started going into nature and walking. Thereby, I'm only now learning names of plants, flowers, etc. So in that case, really, it has had a profound effect on you, um, because this is a switch, right? And I have a friend who has a very same or similar experience. About pandemic time, I invited some people to go on a walk, and she was one of them. And I have to say, she just turned 77, and up to about a year and a half, under 2 years ago, she will tell you nature really wasn't part of her life. She didn't. She lives in a kind of a high-rise apartment. She didn't even have plants in her apartment. And since the pandemic, since really we went on the walk, and um, she started going out more on her own, and she will tell you it's just changed her life in dramatic ways. And like the person in the chat who said, I'm just noticing things that I never noticed before, or I'm just learning the names of these things. That's a really dramatic change. So um, we talk a lot about the pandemic and about how difficult it's been, and it certainly has been. But this is one plus, I think, is that many of us have had the time or the opportunity to go out in nature more. And nature has afforded us, talking about a gift, nature has afforded us that place to go where we can, in some sense, isolated, but also feel connected to that more than human world. Okay. Um, I'm sort of wrapping up here. And again, if you have questions, there'll be time yet to, go through them and answer them. But I put together a reading list here for anybody who is interested. And I'll just kind of quickly go through it. And if you're interested, you can look up these titles and read a little bit more about them, or check them out of the library, or get them from the library through some interlibrary loan if they're not available at your library. But the first one, and these are alphabetical according to the author's last name, but the first one on there is Your Guide to Forest Bathing. Amos Clifford is the person that I mentioned, who is a co-founder of the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. And he's just done a revised version of his book, Your Guide to Forest Bathing. So it really is a kind of, if you're interested if you get interested, go on some walks, and you want to do this practice on your own, it's a good guide for how to do it, some of the history again behind it, and what the reasoning is for doing this practice. Second book on there is called Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if any of you have read it. It came out in 2015, and I just have a little story about it. In 2015, after it came out, my niece gave me a copy. She thought, oh, this will be a great gift for my Aunt Linda. And of course it was, but it sat on my shelf until last year. And then I had the opportunity to read it along with a group of people. And I tell you, I'm just so happy that I've read this book. I just really enjoyed it. But and I have to say, it's some of the book is really tough, because she talks about some of the damage we have done to our world. But I just really enjoyed this book in so many ways. But I have to say, I'm glad that I read it with the group, because I felt like there was so much in this book to talk about, and so much to kind of digest. It's not a book that you can breeze through. So I don't know if sometimes libraries do, group reads, but this would be a good one for a group read. Oh, and thanks, Matt. He's going to send this list to everybody, so who is registered. So you'll get a copy of this. Next book on there is a memoir, and it's called The Home Place: Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature. Came out in 2016 by J. Drew Lanham. As a memoir, he talks about his own experience with nature. He talks about, as a child growing up in the South, what his earlier experiences were, and how that developed his love for nature. And and also just talking about his experience as a colored person. Just kind of a different kind of topic, but talks about it in a really honest and interesting way. So that's a memoir. The next one, this is kind of a classic in forest therapy and forest bathing circles, but this is a researcher, Dr. King Lee, and he has written this book, Forest Bathing, How Trees Can Help You Find Health and Happiness, 2018. And he, I believe, continues to do research on the benefits of how, forest therapy is both a physiological and a psychological, has benefits for us. And so you might find that it's sort of, and again, it's kind of already kind of a classic within this topic. And the next book is very different from that, but I put it in here. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the poems of Mary Oliver. She is no longer living, but she immersed herself in nature, and many of her poems are what I would call nature-based. This book is from 2005, Why I Wake Early, new poems, obviously not new poems standing in the year 2021, but the poems, in some sense, don't get old. If you haven't read Mary Oliver, I would encourage you to, even if you're a person who feels like poetry is difficult or poetry is hard, she's very accessible. And as I said, she has some great poems that just by reading them connect us to nature. The next book, Healing Trees, A Pocket Guide to Forest Bathing, that is the one that I mentioned earlier, took a quotation out of that one by Ben Page. Ben Page is or was a guy, was a trainer for the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Programs. He's still associated with ANFT, and he is a guide who leads walks in Los Angeles. But this is his new book that's come out and talks about, in some personal ways, his connection to nature, which is developing. And so again, reading this, you'll get a good sense of some of the history about forest bathing and forest therapy and his own personal experience and reflections on that. The next book, 2018, The Way of the Coyote, by Gavin Van Horn. Gavin Van Horn is from, is writing from the Chicago area here and talking about the coyote population in Chicago and in urban areas. And really, I know this is focusing on this one animal, but really talking about how even in urban areas, whether we realize it or not, nature is with us. And it's up to us sometimes to notice that. And when he talks about coyotes in Chicago, many of us don't notice that there's a pretty substantial coyote population. And I know maybe I don't know about Schaumburg, but I know in some of the suburbs surrounding Chicago, we certainly have our coyote population. And he talks about how an appreciation for coyotes, for that particular animal and their ability to live in these urban areas, but also how and I think this applies to not just coyotes, but how we as humans need to be more aware of, again, of what's around us, of the animals and the world around us, and learn to live with the world around us many times in a better way or in a different way. Last two books here, The Nature Fix, 2017 by Florence Williams. Florence Williams is a reporter, and in this book, this is a good book for if you're interested in some of those some of the research that's being done and some of those research projects that have been done, testing people, what are the physiological effects? What are the, when people go out in nature and they come back and they do blood pressure readings, or they they put electrodes in the brain and kind of trying to figure out what happens to us when we are in nature. she has written about that in the Nature Fix. And then the last book I put on this list, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, it's just some of the ones that I have read or some of the ones that I, are current that I've been thinking about. But The Heartbeat of Trees, Embracing Our Ancient Bond with Forests and Nature by Peter Wohlleben. You may have read some other things or heard about some other books by him, but this is his most recent book. And I actually haven't read this one. I just requested it from my library. It's not on my library shelf, but I'm looking forward to reading it when it comes in. Okay, I see that is all that I have for my list. Somebody's got a question here. So how much does it cost to become a forest therapist? I can say that, and I can say what my experience was, or I can say through ANFT. And ANFT is not the only organization that trains forest therapy guides, but they are one of the main ones in the US. I think that the cost would be about $3,000, and it may be more now. Again, I don't know what I haven't looked on the site lately to see what the current costs are, but maybe between $3,000 and $4,000. And my training involved a week of intensive training, I should say, with the leaders. And that was reading and sharing and talking about things and actually going on walks and a very intensive experience. And then that was followed by 6 months of study with a mentor. And and part of that was also that what I was talking about, learning about a particular area, learning about the plants, doing practice walks that are evaluated at first with a small group or with a private group, and then public walks that are evaluated. So that's part of becoming a certified guide. We also need to go through first aid training. I went through wilderness first aid training, so that's also part of it. And then after 6 months, you're working with your mentor, you're doing the homework, and then it's all reviewed, and you'll be certified or not. I think since the pandemic hit, that's been turned around a bit. So the way that I just described it has been changed a bit, where actually because it's not in person necessarily, or part of it might be in person at the end of the training. I think they are now starting to do more in-person parts of the training again. A lot of it might be online, but then at the end now, I think there is that gathering. So it might look a little different now, but that was my training, what that looked like. Okay. Anybody else with questions or questions that I haven't answered? Or something else you want to ask about? I've been talking a while. I hope that if you're interested, that you have a good chance this Saturday to experience an actual walk for free. So I hope if you're interested, you're able to go, and if you haven't signed up already, sign up and do that. So anybody else, questions or comments? Yeah, and I want to say thank you to all of you for tuning in and for listening and for asking questions. And I hope you again can experience a walk soon and spend some time out in nature.
There was a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
May I know when you are doing a guided walk in DuPage County? Do you have any upcoming forest walks coming up?
I have a forest walk coming up next month, but it's in Lake County. So if you're willing to drive a little bit, I have one scheduled for October 23rd through the Zion Benton Public Library. So you can go on the Zion Benton Public Library website. I hope I'm not taking anything away from the
No,
Schaumburg
that's
Library,
fine.
but this one is October 23rd, and I know it's not in DuPage County, but you're welcome to come on that one. And I don't have any currently scheduled for DuPage County, unfortunately. That may change in the future. I don't know. I don't know if I can give my email or not. I don't want to trespass on that, but yeah, so just one coming up next month, and certainly if you can take advantage of that one that's coming up this Saturday at Carl Hansen. Some more questions?
Retta Hennessy wants to thank you for the presentation.
Oh, Retta, yeah, great. You're welcome. Good luck. I hope all goes well on the walk on Saturday.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. So thank you so much, Linda, for your time tonight. Really appreciate it, sharing with us.
You're welcome.
And thanks to you at home for joining us. If you still wish to join, we still have some spots open on Saturday. But thank you for coming tonight.